So obviously the big thing on students' minds right now is tuition.
Right.
And the tuition proposals that will be voted on by the Board of Regents this Thursday and Friday. So how exactly did you come up with determining how much tuition should increase?
We start early in the academic year to think about tuition and fees within the context of how you fund and operate the university. They're only one piece of it, but of course it's a very visible piece. And in the fall we have an all-day workshop where we invite student leaders, both undergraduate and graduate, faculty leaders to come, and we go through the current fiscal condition of the university. Show them the role that tuition and fees play, the role that the state support plays, money we get from contracts and grants, where endowments, gifts, the whole multi-dimensional pot of soup that goes into funding a complicated organization like the University of Arizona. So that's the first start. And at about that time, we're starting to get input, rumors, whiffs of what the state situation might be. Then in early January, of course, the governor's budget comes out, and we then, due to the timing, try and gear our proposal to meet the governor's budget. Now, we assume that it'll be passed. Obviously, that's not the case in this particular situation. But you have to have something at least semi-quantitative to go with. Throughout all of this, I meet regularly with the head of ASUA, the head of GPSC, and we're talking about these numbers. We're going back and forth. As far as fees are concerned, the groups that are going to propose fees, whether it's Student Affairs, Melissa Vito, whether it's Health and Rec, IT, they have their various committees that work with the students as well. So there's a lot of input garnered, but there are these multiple timelines that are running, right? You've got a timeline for the region setting tuition, you've got a timeline for the legislature and the governor approving a budget, and then you've got a timeline that we're looking at for making admissions offers for the incoming freshman class, as well as for graduate students, but probably focus on undergraduates for the purpose of this talk. So we're making offers of admissions that are accompanied by offers of financial aid. And those are happening in January, February, March. We don't know what the budget is. We don't know what the tuition will be. So all of these different timelines are going on. Additionally, if we have to make reductions in force, you need to give a 90-day notice. And so you've got to keep that in mind as you're coming up to the July 1 start of the fiscal year. So it's complex. The way we came up with this tuition proposal was we looked at the following factors. We looked at an anticipated $67 million cut as part of the governor's budget. We'll now know that's 78, not 67. We looked at what reductions we could make in our operating budget. We looked at any reserves that we have, one-time monies that we could use to soften the tuition. And we looked at the increase in operating expenses that you had, just like anybody running a household. Your utilities are going to go up, the cost for books and journal subscriptions to the library is going to go up, the cost of health benefits, that is, we call it ERE, employee-related expenses, all those are going to go up. So you have to figure that in as well. With that in hand, we said, oh, and then we're also getting guidelines from the regents. Sometimes guidelines, sometimes recommendations, sometimes absolute requirements. That's their job. They have fiduciary responsibility. So the regents told us, of the $67 million, you will take $39 million in actual reduction of operating expenses. Okay. So that left us with 28. How are we going to deal with that? And looking at where we were on tuition, where our peers were and will be on tuition, the market that we deal with, we came up with a proposal of the $1,500 for resident and $600 for out of state. That will generate about $22 million to cover some of that shortfall, the rest to be covered with reserves. Why $1,500? Why $600? Well, the $600, the out of state, is really dictated overwhelmingly by the market. And all of our studies have shown us we're basically where the market will bear right now. We're a bit higher than our sister institutions, but because of our brand name, we feel we can hold that market share. So that's the $600. And then the $1,500, we looked again at comparing to our peer institutions. where students go, where we compete for faculty. And that still puts us very much in the middle of that pack and brings it up to a level that we think is appropriate when we make a commitment to financial aid. So that's the other factor involved. It's multi-dimensional space here, right? If the regents approve this tuition increase, then we know we can continue our financial aid program at the level or an increased level to what we've done so far. We now, of course, are faced with, well, so that was how we came to it, assuming the governor's budget. We're now faced with an additional $11 million reduction. It's gone from 67 to 78. So now if you look at that 78, we're pledged to take 39 streams. That turns out to be just half, right? 39 million in cuts to the operating budget of the university. If the tuition proposal passes, we'll have 22 million. So that brings us up to 61, and that means we have another, I'm going to do this right, 17 million that we would cover with reserves, plus the increase in general operating expenses. I'm not talking about pay raises now. I'm talking about, as I said earlier, utilities, library, book subscriptions, employee-related expenses and the like. And we estimate that conservatively to be another 10 million. So now you're up to about 27 million. And we have roughly 28 million in reserves. So even with the increase cut from the legislature and the governor of 78 million, if the tuition increase passes, we feel we'll be able to manage FY12 with no reduction in our commitment to financial aid. But remember, we've got to take 39 million out of our operating budget. And let me talk about that for a minute. You're nice to let me drone on here. How do you make cuts to a budget like we have? Right? If you look at the past, our budget, our state budget's gone down $100 million from what it was in 08. We've gone from 340 to 440 million in our state budget. The way we've handled that has been twofold. One, we've cut out about $50 million in our operating costs. We've had tuition increases that amounted to about another 30, and then we used some federal funds to plug the gap. But when I say we've cut out 50 million in the past, or we're going to cut out another 39 million, what does that mean? It means people. That's the, I don't know, the sad part of all of this, right? We talk about efficiencies, we talk about consolidations, right? Taking 4 colleges into one, taking multiple departments into schools, School of Mind, Brain and Behavior, School of Engineering and Environmental Sciences, all of these different schools that reduce the amount of administrative overhead you need, but that's people. So we now have about 600 fewer, a little over 600 fewer people employed now than we did, staff, than we did before all these cuts came about. And we will probably lose more positions due to the 39 million. So when you hear people talk about efficiencies and streamlining, it's all very good, and we're doing that, but that translates into jobs. The way the financial aid situation is now at the U of A, in this current year, we have put out roughly $160 million of what I would call our funds, right? That is either tuitions, the collections that come to us, endowed scholarships, gifts, grants that are made to the university to support students. Okay, so 160 million, big number. In addition, our students have received about 40 million in Pell Grants, so those are federal dollars. So overall, a good round number to use for financial aid this year is about 200 million. Within that 200 million is the 17% mandatory set-aside for need-based aid as required by the regents. Notice all those qualifiers. Mm-hmm. Right? We're well above that 17%. So we could drop back on financial aid and still be in compliance with the regent's set-aside requirement. But we don't intend to do that if the tuition proposal is approved. And that's the other quandary we're in. If you look at the budget of the university, that is discretionary, that's supported by the state and by tuition. I mean, there's a whole other set of the budget out here that's contracts and grants, but if I have a contract with the National Institutes of Health or the Department of Energy, I have to spend the money as that contract tells me. I may hire graduate students or undergraduates, but I can't suddenly turn that into financial aid. Same thing is true with gifts. The donor usually says, I want you to spend this money on scholarship to some student from Yuma, or I want you to spend this money on a new piece of equipment in molecular and cellular biology lab. I'm making these things up. But donors are usually very prescriptive about how they want their money spent. So you set those aside, those are required. You look at tuition and state funds and you say, where can you make big cuts if you have to make big cuts in order to have the state and the tuition income match the ongoing operating expenses? And there are only two areas with big dollars. By big, I mean tens of millions of dollars. You can find 100,000 here or 50,000 there. But remember, we're talking in the tens of millions of dollars now. The only two places where we have money of that kind is in salaries. 85 to 90% of our state dollars are in salaries. And that means people, or in what I just talked to you about, financial aid, 160 million. So if you reduce the tuition income or the state income even more than the 78 million, the only two places to go are those two. And then that has other consequences. Right? So you like to think that you can make this all balance, but in the end, decisions and sacrifices are being made.
Last year, you came out with your preliminary tuition fee proposal for the university, and then, I believe it was the day before the Regents meeting, you revised that for reasons that have been speculated about, which I won't speculate. But what sort of things are you hearing from the Regents? Do you think that they are supportive of this increase?
That's a good question. I don't think I can characterize the Regents' current position on our tuition proposal. The Regents are thoughtful, they're engaged in this question, but they all are very different. And so I honestly don't know where the consensus will evolve. As I look at the various input I've had, whether from students, from parents, from community citizens, from colleagues around the country, from Regents, I think our proposal is a good one. I think it's well thought out. I think it tries to strike the right balance. Maybe it's a balance of shared pain, but the right balance among making cuts and yet not harming the financial aid program and not harming our ability to support students. So I feel good about the proposal, even at this late stage with all of the information I've received. I shouldn't say I feel good about it. I think it's the right proposal. It's necessary. Nobody feels good about raising tuition.